Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this November 8th meeting of the Sacramento Transportation Authority. Good to see you all here. We'll start with roll call, please.
Good afternoon. Directors Cruz.
Here.
Carr. Fox.
Here.
Frost. Gatewood. Guerra. Hanson.
Here.
Howell. Hume.
Here.
Kennedy.
Here.
Natoli.
Here.
Peters.
Here.
Chenier.
Here.
Cerna. And Suen.
Here.
And Mr. Harris.
Here.
Thank you. You have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Director Soon, would you lead us in the pledge? That's you, Darren. Pledge of allegiance.
Hand over heart. Ready? Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I'd like to just say that the City Council is convening closed session at 3 o'clock, so we're going to end promptly at about 10 minutes till 3. I think that the meeting is short enough that that should pose no problem. And first we have one comment from somebody not on the agenda. That would be Jeffrey Tartagia. Jeffrey?
Well, my comment is congratulations to the city on Measure U. Please spend it wisely, and please make sure that it is accounted for. In the meantime, I think that makes your jobs all the tougher be trying to get a transportation tax in any sales form. So I'm hoping you have some alternative thoughts and ideas than a general sales tax to be created for the county. And I also hope that you make outreaches to those areas. And since I see Henry is here from RT, also that the outreach efforts are made to the outlying organizations and places that need public transportation. Because the route optimization right now, I feel like does not do an adequate job of dealing with direct coverage and for the future. And every time RT has reduced bus service, it has lost ridership.
Thank you, Mr. Tartagia. The next item would be the Executive Director's Report. Norm?
Good afternoon. Back on August 9th, your board approved a package of 7 transportation projects to be submitted to the California Transportation Commission for Cycle 2 of the SB1 Local Partnership Program. I am pleased to report that on October 17th, the CTC approved all 7 of the local projects for funding. Regional Transit and every local jurisdiction got something in this round. And now that Prop 6 was defeated 55% to 45% on Tuesday, SB1 will stick around, and the local agencies can start drawing their funding beginning July 1st of 2019. This now brings the total number of SB1 funded projects in Sacramento County to 163 that are either already underway, completed, or about to be started very shortly. We're very pleased that these projects can continue to move forward. Regarding Measure A, the Independent Taxpayer Oversight Committee requested a special meeting with the senior staffs of the local jurisdictions, that receive Measure A funds. And they would like to discuss with them new performance measures in preparation for their performance audit next year. That meeting will be November 15th, starting at 4:30, and everyone is welcome to attend. Regarding Freeway Service Patrol, I regret to announce that we have terminated the contract for FSP service on I-5 and I-80, which still had over 1 year left on the term. We are immediately issuing a request for proposals to get a replacement contractor, and that is item 4 on today's agenda. In the interim, we have executed a change order with our other FSP contractor to put their backup truck in service. And we've also reconfigured our beats to spread out the coverage to minimize impacts on the motoring public. That concludes the Executive Director's report.
Okay, I have a question for you, Norm. So with the SB1 funding that will continue, we need to match a lot of that, don't we?
That's correct.
Can you kind of sketch out how that would work?
Well, every dollar that comes in through SB1 has to be matched, and the ratios depend on the program, but I believe it's a low of 20% and a high of 1 to 1. So
So for us to avail ourselves of that money, we need match funds, and we currently don't have them in the SDA budget. Is that a fair statement?
What I would say is that all of our Measure A funds have already been committed to matches.
Exactly. That's something to keep in mind. Okay, very good. Next item would be consent. Do we have any comments from directors about the consent calendar? Do I have a motion?
I'll move it.
Second?
Moved by Chenier, second by Soon. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Consent calendar passes. And next, we go right to separate items.
Mr. Chair, just a quick question for the
Yeah.
clerk. I noticed that even the places where the microphones aren't supposed to be on, they're still showing on. They're still,
Live.
can you just turn them off?
Yes.
Thank you. These screens are inactive, but the mics are still on.
All good?
Oh, they got them in the back.
Okay, our next item will be a presentation on community perspectives on local transportation needs and funding. And I believe representing all of these communities here will be Kiran Kumar.
And I believe there's a presentation. I mean, there is. Great. Good afternoon. My name is Kiran Kumar. I am the Executive Director of Walk Sacramento. We're a regional nonprofit that promotes investment in the built environment that supports health, economy, safety, and sustainability. I'm joined today by partners in our network who are closely aligned with our mission. Those partners include the Environmental Council of Sacramento, the Sacramento Area Bicycle Advocates, Sacramento Transit Advocates and Writers, 350 Sacramento, Breathe California of Sacramento Region, the Sacramento Housing Alliance, Sierra Club, Motherlode Chapter, and Cien Amigos. Today, we have been invited to share with you our perspectives on transportation funding needs in Sacramento County. To date, the prevailing discussion has been tied to developing a second transportation sales tax. However, the comments we share with you today are universal and apply to any initiative to fund transportation in the Sacramento region, be it a sales tax measure, roadway pricing, or other effort. Our missions collectively represent the advancement of health, access, equity, justice, and environmental stewardship through investments in the built environment, and represent a wide-reaching constituency of Sacramento's most engaged voters. Based on the wide array of needs and priorities, we believe that creating a more functional transportation system starts with creating more transportation choice across communities. This gets us to a 21st century transportation system. The purpose of our collective efforts is to organize constituents around and inform decision makers on the development and funding of a progressive, innovative, and functional transportation system. Our organizations were excluded from the development of Measure B, and as such were neither able to inform the measure nor contribute positively to its outcome. Our involvement only came when asked to support and vote for a measure we had no role in informing. Today, you've invited us to tell you what we think about funding priorities for the Sacramento region. However, we think that might be the wrong question. We think the question should be, how do we collectively and effectively identify funding priorities together for the Sacramento region? You will not hear us today discussing specific projects or percent allocations. Instead, we are committed to ensuring that transportation funding decisions in Sacramento County are not made in silos, serve community-wide goals, and are developed through an effective, iterative public engagement process. Decision makers across Sacramento County, including many on this board, have pointed to LA's Measure M as a model. We agree. But to make sure that that happens and manifests here in Sacramento, it is critical that we understand and follow the steps that made Measure M successful. Measure M, which passed with 70% of the vote in perpetuity in LA, was Metro's response to Measure J in 2012. Measure J failed to win passage by just 16,000 votes. Measure J resembled Sacramento County's Measure B in that they were both produced through a top-down process that failed to engage community stakeholders in identifying transportation priorities. Instead, Measure J simply promoted a list of projects that did not reflect any clear goals or objectives. Further, there was no clear consensus or champion on the Metro board for Measure J. Without being reflective of goals, officials were unable to go back to their communities and be advocates for the measure. Following the failure of that measure, Metro undertook to solicit community input on transportation priorities as the first step towards crafting another measure for the 2016 ballot. Metro also worked with local and regional agencies to develop a process for identifying and prioritizing projects that could be shown to be reflective of those goals and priorities. By starting early to identify those priorities, Metro garnered widespread support amongst member jurisdictions and community stakeholders, as well as the many thousands of voters who participated in surveys, focus groups, and town hall meetings. Just as Measure M was the corrective to Measure J, Sacramento County's next transportation sales tax measure, or funding strategy, must be treated as a corrective to the failed approach that produced Measure B. We are committed to ensuring that Sacramento's next transportation funding effort is not a simple repackaging of Measure B, nor the process that created it. This starts with identifying community-wide goals and developing a project list that can be shown to meet those goals. If an expenditure plan is developed behind closed doors and does not reflect clearly achievable local priorities, for example, corridor safety, safer routes to school, and better bus service, then voters are not bought in. This was the case with the failed Measure J in LA. We also acknowledge that compromise is necessary for funding allocations. An expenditure plan that collectively achieves goals has room for compromise within it, while still meeting the needs of the majority. Goals like a vehicle miles traveled neutral investment plan means that roadway capacity projects are fine so long as the sum total of those projects reduce vehicle miles traveled. Starting with goals also ensures that transparency is built into the process. Voters are able to judge whether investments achieve those agreed upon goals. It would be a waste of time and effort and money to send out a public engagement consultants to communities if the project lists given back to STA by our member jurisdictions are not in line with those priorities. This is something that we saw with Measure B. Instead, through a public engagement process, STA must develop and adopt goals that speak to the priorities of constituents across the region and require that each project list achieves those goals. So this chart reflects not only what we believe to be a successful public engagement process to get us to an expenditure plan, but also mirrors the successful effort taken in LA for Measure M. As I've stated already, we must begin today not with polling about voter willingness, but engaging individuals and groups about their neighborhood transportation needs. We must also not expect that stakeholders can attend STA board meetings, and I know we all know this, but instead we must make an effort to go out to communities. The engagement process itself is what we argue is the recipe for success. Doing so creates buy-in into the end result. Polling simply gauges preferences and does nothing to create demand. If done successfully, the measure sells itself. Demand was created through this process for Measure M, and it was clear that support then snowballed within these communities. After identifying priorities across neighborhoods, STA must adopt goals before soliciting projects from member jurisdictions. From these goals, we're able to develop categories of investment, strategies for achieving county-wide goals. This process also means that it is driven by metrics for success. If a project cannot be shown to meet the goals established by the community and these stakeholders, it should not be included within an expenditure plan. We also acknowledge that communities in the unincorporated rural and suburban parts of Sacramento County were not bought onto Measure B. It is critical that as we develop an engagement strategy, that these areas and these communities are prioritized first so that funding strategies in Sacramento County are reflective of diverse constituencies and political affiliations. I think the point that's most important to underscore here, though, is the term iterative. Public engagement, if we're meant to be successful in this effort, cannot just happen once at the beginning and then the rest of it happen behind closed doors. It must be an integral part of everything we do. We must be able to go back to community members and constituents to demonstrate that their input previously has led to the next step. This is how we create buy-in. This is how buy-in was created in LA. Having, as a coalition of 9 or so organizations, we've done a bit of due diligence since Measure B failed, in identifying with our constituencies what some of their priorities and goals are for funding in Sacramento County. These goals are not specific to a sales tax measure, but rather apply across all transportation efforts. These are by no means a comprehensive list of goals either. Instead, it's imperative that STA engage communities across Sacramento County to vet and develop additional goals and identify how new ones can be incorporated to develop a funding strategy. Some of the ones that we've identified so far are a safer and healthier Sacramento region through investments in the built environment and transportation, active transportation specifically, investment that promotes economic and infill development with a focus on transit-oriented development, equitable investments across disadvantaged communities, a functional public transportation system, and VMT-neutral transportation investments that I had mentioned before. We've heard some refer to our next funding initiative as needing to do a better sales job. If we're selling a measure that was developed with no public engagement and one that does not achieve a 21st century transportation system, we failed. We must make sure that we are setting ourselves on the right path to success, starting with ensuring that our outreach efforts are effective in identifying priorities, developing goals, and creating countywide buy-in. Our coalition is dedicated to assisting STA in every single step of the way. However, a process that lacks iterative public engagement is not reflective of those community-wide goals and seeks to repackage Measure B in the failed process that created it is not one that we can support. I think there are 3 key steps to success starting today. Is one, to read how to pass a mega transportation measure. This was a document that Metro and their board put together after the passage of Measure M, which is serving as a roadmap for communities across the country to develop funding strategies. Create, fund, and implement a comprehensive public engagement strategy. I understand that after my presentation, the STA board will move to approve a contract with a public engagement specialist. I implore you to ask yourselves whether or not that is reflective, the contract is reflective of an iterative public engagement process that creates demand from the community, or if it's a polling effort. And then finally, partner with this coalition to develop and implement that engagement strategy. We look forward to working with each one of you to accomplish this vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. We'll just launch right into director's questions, starting with Director Kennedy.
Yes, thank you, Karen. So there's multiple things going on here at the same time. I just want to make sure that everybody's clear that in this iterative process, we are not simply depending upon the contract that is, potential contract that is on the agenda, and that there is another effort that's going on that is being managed through SACOG, that the city and county funded to get a more iterative process, as you say, rather than just depending on polling. You're aware of that, right?
Yeah, we've been involved, and we've sat down as part of those stakeholder meetings, regardless if it's led by SACOG, if it's led by STA staff or the consultant. I'm pushing for not a specific already established process, but a process that is reflective of an iterative engagement strategy. It sounds like we're on the right steps, but I think there's additional refinement in terms of getting to that point where we've really developed that community buy-in, rather than, again, just asking preferences and then developing a funding strategy and expenditure plan that is really driven by our professional advisory group.
Okay. Where do you find that we're falling down in that area?
I haven't said that we are falling down yet.
Okay.
I think it's important that we establish that, and it's a very apparent and transparent process as well moving forward.
Okay, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. I mean, we've had, in many of the people sitting up here have attended dozens of community meetings so far, and we're still 2 years out from a potential measure.
Right.
So, I mean, we hear you, and I think that we're taking the corrective actions that you're looking for.
And that's great to hear.
Okay, thank you.
Director Shamir.
Thank you, Chair. So thanks. I want to thank all the groups for coming up. I just want to kind of put an exclamation mark a little bit on what Director Kennedy has said, because we have spent quite a bit of time. You have one contract, and unfortunately, I have a budget meeting at City Hall in a few minutes, so I'm going to be leaving as well. But we spent a lot of time thinking through the process and talking to folks in the community about the process. And there are multiple, as Patrick said, there are multiple processes going on. The first was SACOG, which is funded through the city and the county to do outreach, to really do a listening campaign on that. The second is what we're looking at potentially doing today. I just want to reinforce that the decisions will be made with a lot of public input on what folks want, on how we do it. And my request to you all is there's process and there's content. We need to do both correctly. On the content side, if you have specifics, getting them in writing from you so that we can be iterative and reflective with you in meetings would be really helpful to us.
I appreciate that. We purposely stayed away from talking about content today because
No, I
I
understand.
think process is important.
And I'm fine on the process. None of us, I think Mr. Kennedy and I have been working on this for at least 6 months, if not more than that. So, which is not reflected in the presentation. So I'm being a little bit defensive here we've really tried. We have talked to the folks in LA. We've gone to conferences about this. So we're trying to really mirror the process that both Seattle, which was very successful as well, and LA have used. So,
And I do hope that you see this partially as kudos for the process that has been enacted already, and
so that was on your first slide?
an encouragement to continue. No, it wasn't stated
Okay.
anywhere in the slides. I would also
appreciate
say
that.
that there are important factors in between and throughout the process, including the adoption of those goals from the STA board, and then taking those back out to the communities to vet and then develop those strategies.
No, I think that's totally appropriate, and I hope we would do that.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think there's a couple of critical questions I'd like the group to think about, but I also think that you're unduly harsh about not acknowledging the situation with Measure B. We're in the transition of an executive director, and it was decided very late, in consultation with some of the people who may not be happy with the way that expenditure plan turned out, that we should give it a go. So whether or not it worked out well, I think that it's sort of, the criticism is well taken, but it's also disconnected from the facts of why that decision was made to move forward. And I think that a lot of people can say that the expenditure plan could have been refined differently, or there could have been more process, but I don't think that it's fair just to say that it was a top-down process. I think that it was a quick process and it was messy, and I think that some of the feedback and the way that Seattle or LA did it is really smart. But the decision to try in 2016 was an informed decision with some of the people in the room part of that. Whether it went the way they liked in the expenditure plan, I think is the same food fight that likely will happen, so we're trying to resolve that in advance. The critical questions, though, are, you know, with SB1 being sustained and agencies getting road repair money, the previous measure, Measure B, was really a fix-it-first measure. Sure. It wasn't really about new projects. It was about completing the projects that have been promised in Measure A and providing maintenance and repair money. So that largely, but not fully, having been addressed in some way through SB1, what is, and this is a rhetorical question, what should be our community goals? I know that we had a very kind of interesting process about whether or not there should be complete streets rules in here, whether or not transit and roads had a fair share, you know, how that balance was struck. There was debate about big capital projects, and, you know, there's a push and pull sometimes around those because not everybody will agree on those. But how do we resolve those disagreements even if people don't have their vision captured in a plan so that they can accept the larger pieces of it? I think that that's part of what, when you have a short time, you don't really get to work through and help people come to terms with. I think the other thing, though, too, is, you know, really looking at the transit attitudes study that the STA did in 2016. The polling that was done and the focus group work, I think, is still really useful. We've seen some agencies also turn themselves around, particularly regional transit is in a much better place than it was then. And I think some of those attitudes may have held us back. So I think looking at some of the areas where, and you say neighborhood goals, most of the neighborhoods I represent, they just want their PCI to be at a high enough number so they're not worried. But if they don't have sidewalks, I don't hear them clamoring for sidewalks. But we should be thinking about what a safe community, a walkable community, a bikeable community is, so that we can do that. The other thing that was really missing, and we had a large fisticuff around, was what are we doing for air quality? And original Measure A had some air quality money to help clean the transportation sector. And I think, all of these things as they intersect present a three-dimensional puzzle that we have to resolve. I think the last piece, though, that I would encourage this particular group, because I think it is a good group and it's representative, but rather than dwell on the past, tell us how to move forward, because there's a lot of armchair quarterbacking about what's in the rearview mirror, but I think this process can help that, but I don't think it's helpful to go back and point fingers and say, well, we were angry because of last time and now you better listen to us or else. I don't think that's a helpful strategy.
And I would hope that you hear us really pointing towards the future. I think it's helpful to point out that there was no clear, apparent public engagement strategy for developing those goals to get people excited about Measure B that we do have the opportunity to do now. That's what a public engagement process like this represents in terms of the opportunity and the implementation.
But again, and I don't want to quibble about this. We fell short by about 3,000 votes. 3,500 votes. In a county of as large as ours, for a 2/3 measure, it wasn't fundamentally broken in the eyes of the voters. We came just short. And so how do we continue to move forward and get across that 2/3 threshold? Some people sitting in this audience might think it was a crappy measure and should never have been passed and campaigned against it. Well, it's all well and good, but that may not reflect the views of the vast majority of the public. And so how do we reconcile those things, having come just short?
I would say we go back and talk to the public.
Yeah.
Okay, I think there's agreement there, actually. Director Soon.
Thank you, Chair. Karen, and thank you for your presentation. I apologize if I missed this in your earlier presentation, but this coalition, I think, is great, and I'm just wondering if you've begun work amongst yourselves to basically this process, vetting your own priorities between, for instance, Walk Sacramento and bicycle advocates and those kinds of things to help inform our public engagement process. Because I think at the end of the day, we all need to coalesce around, one vision, right? And so it all is going to start in various parts of the community.
Absolutely.
You've got a great coalition here, and I think if you guys are doing that already, that might help us, and at least we can have a higher level conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the major lessons learned was that it was a joint effort between a coalition that looked much like this, but of course eventually grew to include the business community and many other interests in LA, in partnership with Metro, that developed jointly a public engagement strategy to develop those goals and then again vet that funding strategy. That's what the offer is essentially now, is to work collaboratively to get to that point. In a way that not just engages our constituents, but engages other constituents throughout primarily the unincorporated county, suburban areas, and more rural areas, because we know that's where those are communities that didn't necessarily support Measure B as strongly. But again, one of the lessons learned with Measure J was through that collaborative engagement process, they were able to get significantly more votes and interest out of those communities when they went back with Measure M. And again, that's an opportunity that I see moving forward.
But so amongst yourselves, you guys have begun those conversations already?
Right.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Very good. Director Guerra.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Again, I do, like Director Suen said, I also appreciate the coalition you brought together, particularly including an organization like Cien Amigos that is a regional organization
right.
of different business and education partners and neighborhood leaders as well. So I think that's the type of input that we need is, is those that have a broader perspective also of what the region is looking at. The other piece, and I think Board Member Hanson was at this presentation from the Speaker of the Assembly of Utah at the New Partners of Smart Growth, but
Right.
I think we can learn a lot from what other states have done, where they, they focused on what the overall values of what we're trying to accomplish are. And I know that I think their message at that time was, why are we doing this? And it's because we want to get you home for dinner on time. And
Right.
so I think focusing on those pieces are a critical thing. But I do want to underscore the point that Board Member Kennedy said, is that we are 2 years out. I mean, the fact that we're having this conversation should underscore and send a message to the public that that ground level input is what we're trying to accomplish, and we're moving in that direction. So I think everyone here at their local level has been trying to do that in every attempt to find out what our priorities are. And we're only getting to the start of it, and I hope we can move on to the next item here too, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director Garrett. Anybody else? So I'll get to you in a second, Jeffrey. We do have one comment, but before that, I'd like to just chime in a little bit here. The first thing I'd like to say to you, Kieran, and everybody in all the organizations you're speaking on behalf of today, is that we don't want to fail twice. And we did learn lessons from Measure B. Absolutely. You've alluded to some. We're all aware of those. And the process moving forward, I believe, will be greatly changed. As Director Hanson pointed out, SB 1 changes the discussion.
Right.
The passage of Measure U changes the discussion. The advent of microtransit changes the discussion. So we're actually in a different place, a very different place than when Measure B was crafted. And I think all of these things are important to bear in mind as we move forward with the process. And many of them are very helpful. So that being said, I personally, I'm just going to toss out my thought. People have a certain level to which they're willing to be taxed, and Measure U makes a difference in the discussion.
Absolutely.
I think that one possible strategy moving forward is to consider a quarter-cent measure for STA and a quarter-cent for RT. So I wanted to put that out there, in the ether as just my 2 cents for something to discuss as a possible idea that might suit the needs of the community and kind of open up that. Those are my comments. Jeffrey, you want to step up?
I also had one to ask.
Well, I'm going to start with and say that it should have started at 2000 when it failed, because like Los Angeles, what you don't mention, Patrick, is 4 years before dealing with accessibility and the transportation community. I live down there, so I know about the transportation community in Los Angeles and what it took and the problems that they had to get addressed. What I will comment your success here in Sacramento is in the last 4 months recognizing what you would have lost with the SB1 funding. You guys then made a good effort here to get that. Note where most of the voting went through. But for the future right now, that means you need to be talking, unlike what happened with, I'll offer right now, the route optimization, where 60,000 college students, how many of them were reached to communicate of what as future transportation needs? How many Kiwanis clubs, how many, should we say, Lions organizations have been contacted to those that drive and are dependent on driving, the importance of why we want in this region an effective means of transportation, an effective system that provides. I agree with what you're suggesting, but at the same time, lay it out and explain it and turn around and go back is what? I mean, for Sue, I offer is the fact that she didn't want to support SB1 funding, but does that mean she doesn't want any benefit for Fair Oaks, Oakland, or Orange County or anything else? You want the benefits, you want what's going on, but it needs to be explained. Sue's got a bunch of stuff that she wants doing in Arden. That's good, but at the same time, what else in this region needs to? Right now, you need to reach those communities out there rurally that specifically through the community centers, through the senior centers, because those are growing up. Those are the things that I totally want to support it, but at the same time say, guys, you haven't done that in the past. Make the better effort to reach everybody that drives.
So to address that point, I'd just like to say that we get it, Jeffrey. This has to be a global, regional view. And I believe that we're taking steps to move along that path. Director Frost.
I wonder if I can ask our clerk to put this picture on the so that we can all see it. Probably a lot of people here know that I'm one of those people that doesn't generally feel excited about the first thing we do is go back to the taxpayers to pay higher taxes. My initial thought is always, can we figure out a way to get the job done without squeezing services? And so what kind of efficiencies can we look for? And I was grappling in my mind over how I was going to vote today on. And I know we haven't gotten to that yet, but I appreciate, and I came in late. Sorry, I was at another appointment, but I really appreciate what you brought here today. And I appreciate your comments relating to the fact that you went back and you were able to listen to the communities and craft something that could get a larger support. And I think part of the problem in Sacramento is that there's a disconnect in, who's benefiting, who perceives they're being benefited, whether they are or not. Do they really understand what the benefit is, and does it touch their daily lives? And this picture that we're looking at it comes from the Registrar of Voters Office based on this election for Prop 6 and how people voted. And for those, and one of the things that I always tell people is my district doesn't like taxes, and I represent them, so I'm not going to vote for that. But what I wanted to point out, because I was going to point this out in the next agenda item, but based on this conversation, what I wanted to point out is there is a disconnect between the suburban and rural areas and the downtown, and there's something that there must be a need that we're starting to. RT is beginning to really hit home with the microtransit. We're doing some really good things. And so I wanted to show this now. I won't finish my comments on the next agenda item, but I just wanted to thank you and I will read this, but for that conversation around listening to, what people really need and fulfilling that. And maybe if you can paint a vision, maybe I'm not opposed to going out and asking the taxpayers what they need and what they can support. That's what we're here for. We represent them. So that was what I wanted to say.
Director Natoli.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And leave the graphic up there. I didn't know that was going to be shown, but it certainly, I think, goes to a point I wanted to make. And going back to 2016 and certainly looking at the results from a couple of days ago as related to the statewide measure, I want to just say that that I certainly appreciate the comments from Corinne and all the folks that are represented here, the organizations. But I think Sue Frost said it very well. There is a disconnect, and a good portion of that green area I represent. There are cities certainly encompassed in that, and I see City of Isleton was the one red dot, it looks like there. But I think the point being made, though, is that, and I said this when we had the discussions, I supported our last go-round, and I certainly spoke in support of it. But I think I conveyed very clearly for those that were on this board at the time, and I've said it to our county staff, if we don't do something in those rural areas, talk about PCIs, we're in the 20s and 30s in some cases, And the traffic, because it's diverting off of freeways, it's diverting off of major roads, going through communities. I'll give you an example. I had a community meeting a week ago Monday in Walnut Grove. We got 7,000 cars a day going through Walnut Grove. People don't have the law enforcement presence because it's CHP enforcement. They see actions that endanger them, their children, their employees, and then they see roads that are deteriorating much faster than even normal maintenance can keep up with. And so if there isn't something in this next measure, again, going to the community, but I'm going to tell you on behalf of the community that I hear from, that whether it's folks in Harold or Slough House or in the Delta communities or adjacent to Galt, certainly even areas that surround Elk Grove and Rancho Cordova, that roads entering and leading into cities that may have better infrastructure, I'm telling you, you're going to, that green may not look like a lot because there's not a lot of votes in comparison to the areas that are in red, but that last measure, if you'd had 3,000 or 6,000 more votes, you'd have had a measure that would have passed.
Right.
This time, you need to listen to those folks as well. And the last measure was general about fixing potholes first and so forth. And we're going to need to show something that really measures up. Otherwise, I think you're going to have a similar map whenever you go out to the voters again.
Thank you, Director Natoli. Well, I mean, that kind of sums up what we were up against with the last measure. We have disparate communities with disparate needs, and we've got our work cut out for us in the next 2 years. And I happen to agree with you that we have to listen, but we have to listen to everybody.
Right.
So city, county, everywhere, and see if we can craft a measure that suits a lot of needs. And I think that my suggestion is one way forward to do that. To meet separate needs, perhaps with separate measures. But that's for the future. Kieran, I want to thank you very much for your presentation. It was a good discussion.
Thank you.
And it will be ongoing.
Great.
Chair, I just want to follow up on
Director Kennedy.
Director Natoli's comment, because I appreciate it, and that's why, he and I have had this conversation that we did exactly make that mistake last time around, and that's why we have solicited the assistance of Supervisor Natoli in some of those green areas, not to sway voters at this point, but to get that input that's so valuable so that those of us that live in the red zones don't keep blinders on and realize that there is the disconnect that Supervisor Frost talks about. So thank you.
All right, I think we've gone through that one. Let's move on to the next item, number 9, selection of a consulting team. Director Hahn.
In June, we released an RFP for public education, community outreach, opinion research, and expenditure plan development. A total of 5 proposals were received, ranging in price from $302,000 to $1.4 million. A committee of the board comprised of members Harris, Howell, Kennedy, Peters, and Chenier reviewed the proposals and invited 2 of the consultant teams for interviews. The committee then invited the team headed by Townsend, Calkin, Tapio back for a second meeting, after which the committee elected to forward a recommendation to the full STA board for the selection of the Townsend team for a contract not to exceed $493,650. Now I'd like to introduce you to Chris Tapio, partner of TCT, and he will come up and say a few words and introduce his team.
Welcome. Launch right in.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Chair and Directors, my name is Chris Tapio, and I'm here on behalf of Townsend, Calkin, Tapio Public Affairs. We're pleased to be here to be your public education and outreach team on behalf of this next measure, and to work with all of you in the greater Sacramento community to conduct the necessary public outreach and hear from the people of Sacramento County about their transportation desires, to share with them the transportation resources that we currently have, and figure out how we can plan for the future together. Our consulting team consists of 3 firms. It's an acronym heavy group. We're TCT, but we have KMP, and we also have FM3. We have Sarah Modeste here and Bob Magnuson, who will be working on our media outreach portion of our outreach plan. and Dave Metz is going to be from FM3 is going to be leading our public opinion and survey portion of the team. I can say on behalf of all of us standing up here, we live here. We have a lot of experience working in Sacramento County, working on transportation measures. In our own firm at TCT, we've worked with a dozen transportation agencies up and down the state to pass local transportation funding measures, to pass statewide transportation funding measures, but we live here. We know Sacramento County. We've worked with Sacramento County to help pass the original Measure A, the Measure A renewal. So I can tell you with a great deal of confidence that we know what we're doing. We're here to work for you and the greater community, and we look forward to doing so. We're happy to answer any questions you might have.
Norm, did you want to talk a little bit more about, you've been talking to the consultants about changes moving forward and a plan that you're developing, because what was in their original proposal may not be exactly what we adhere to.
I think the most important thing is that we get the consultant on board, and then the consultant would work with the committee of the board to craft an exact plan of how we move forward into 2019.
The point I'm trying to make there is that it's not set in stone, and so to the advocates here, I think that the consultants have heard your concerns and will continue to hear your concerns, and certainly the committee will be working with this group to make sure that we move in that direction. I know that'll certainly be my focus on the committee. So it is really important to realize we really don't want to fail. We want this to work, and we hear you. To get it to work, we have to meet the maximum number of people's needs that we can. There's just no other way forward. Tax measures are always tough to pass. It's never easy, and you have to demonstrate value. And in this case, we have to demonstrate substantial value to 2/3 of the voters. So we get that. Okay, Director Henson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have enormous respect for the three of you and your firm. Obviously, you did a tremendous job on Measure A, the original one. You came in during the last stretch of the Measure B campaign, and we got close. I think, as the chair said, we've had input from certainly the stakeholders and advocates who are here about what we could do differently. But I guess the thing that's been in my mind as we think about moving forward that I just encourage is, how do we respond to the new ways of communication? We've been very reliant on mail, and some of the mail that we did on Measure B was, I think, well, I don't know if rushed, but it didn't feel to really hit that point that you just made, Chris, about true to Sacramento. And so I think there's a way to true that up a little bit and think about how, through this process, we think about the message and what people want and how these things fit together. I think the other thing, too, is we really need to think about communicating differently. And I don't need to tell you, it's your business, but with the media landscape changing, a lot of paid media, social media are how people connect to things, truth and untruth. And so I don't know how we face that challenge, but I do think those are the two key things on my mind for your team as we work through this, getting to the various parts of the community that may not feel heard, whether they're rural, urban, advocates or non-advocates, I think is a piece of it. But I think we have a really good opportunity here, and I want to thank you for stepping up and being willing. I think we had a great team last time, and I hope we build on that work. And so I'll make a motion that we approve this.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. Director Frost.
So I'm not opposed to education. I think it's good for us to communicate back to the residents about where their tax money is going. I'm not interested in promoting tax increases, but I have given this sincere thought, and I feel that there's one way that I could support this, and that would be if I was able to receive a breakdown of information from my district So, in other words, I would be interested in receiving feedback on your polling as to how my district feels about things, and I'd like to see, the crosstabs and the breakdown for all the districts so that we can really dive into an information gathering of what do they envision for their communities, what do they need, what isn't being fulfilled, but a breakdown by district so that we can all be informed collectively and individually. I think under those circumstances, if you tell me that's going to be included in this whole process, I could support it.
Thank you. Director Kennedy.
I didn't get an answer.
He shook his head yes.
Yes, sir.
And I get that.
It will be included, yes.
Okay.
And we've done public opinion and polling for a number of local agencies, and we worked with RT on it in 2016, for example, and provided a comprehensive set of crosstabs so we can kind of dive down district by district to see which communities of interest felt differently about certain project elements. So absolutely, that'll be provided.
Together with hands-on outreach in the community as well.
It's not just
Okay.
Survey research.
And so that I'm not going on record as supporting tax increases, but I can support this in an effort to see maybe there is something we can do that's a good for all the communities. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Director Kennedy.
Yes, thank you. As somebody who's with many of us sat on the committee, I just wanted to give a little bit of context here, and specifically to Director Hansen's comment. We interviewed this proposer twice to really flesh it out, and a lot of the questions, and frankly, the questions that really led me to be supportive of this particular proposer were exactly the issues that you brought up, and that's different ways of communicating. And I think that this team is aware of that and well prepared, and it was thoroughly vetted during both interviews.
Director Guerra.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think the committee did a great job in looking at the firms that we have out there, and I agree with the point about having someone that's local and worked on a lot of local issues. I think is going to be the key thing as well. Also want to encourage, again, kind of like Board Member Hansen mentioned, the different avenues, and I appreciate your guys' work too. I know, Sarah, you've done a lot of work also with the Spanish-speaking community in other projects, infrastructure projects, and just having the experience going through this last election, talking to my own family and my mom particularly, when they don't understand the measures, they just vote no. And that's no different than any other voter. So as we see the growth in the Spanish-speaking community and voters going up, they also use the roads. I think we need to make sure that we look at that aspect of it. And I know you guys have a track record of doing that. So again, that's why I felt confident in seconding this motion, because we do have to make sure that we're hitting every avenue and using a regional partner also, and working with folks like Cien Amigos, that is not just the one part of the county, but have members throughout the entire county, rural and urban and suburban, would be helpful. With that, Mr. Chair, I'm ready to support the measure.
Very good. Director Peters.
Yeah, thank you. One of the questions we didn't talk about enough, in my view, in our interviews was getting enough depth of understanding the Prop 6, what the outcome of Prop 6 would have on people's viewpoints. 2 years ago, we didn't have any money coming at us, and so there was no reason for that. I'll be very interested to hear when you come back to us how I guess the defeat of Prop 6, but the having this extra money coming into our jurisdictions from SB 1, how that might affect people's thinking about an additional tax, which, to me, that's all about the math. I would, say in the unincorporated county, we have a $750 million backlog of projects. And with the money we get from SB 1, which is important, we're going to get 24 to 28 million plus what we usually have. So we usually have coming in. So we might have 38 to 40 million, but trying to make get to 750 million within our lifetimes is pretty hard with the smaller, not that I'm not totally grateful for the money that's coming in from SB1, but I wonder how that plays and how it needs to be explained to people. I think it's going to be really important. So,
Yeah, definitely.
thank you.
That's an important point. I'd like to just add to that and reiterate that SB1 has to be leveraged. We need matching funds. We need a source of revenue to make use of all that road money and infrastructure money. Otherwise, we're going to fall short of being able to actually use SB1. So it creates an opportunity, and it creates a very important point for you moving forward. Director Frost.
I wonder if it's possible to receive more information relating to how the taxpayers feel about gas tax versus fees or other taxes that are, we know that the gas tax isn't going to pay for our roads, and we know that transportation as we knew it is changing, and that there are new conversations emerging around how are we going to pay for the roads. And so I would kind of be curious as to if residents might feel more receptive to a different type of tax or fee structure that is more fair, that represents those who are using those that are using the roads. I don't know if that muddies the waters, or what do you think?
It sounds like a fair question, fair question to ask voters. And as the chair noted, the passage of SB1 and the defeat of Prop 6 have significantly changed the landscape in the last 2 years, and we've got another 2 years in which the landscape may continue to change. And we need to talk to the community. We need to explain the funding shortfalls that the county still faces despite passage of SB1, and talk about the desires of the community for the future and how we get there. And we'll definitely be interested in hearing what they have to say about what options they're willing to consider for that.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have one community member who'd like to address this issue, and I'll be darned, it's Jeffrey Tartagia.
Guys, I'm going to say I want 75%, and I'm looking for a coalition develop out of this, because you have, clearly, as Sue has spoken of, there are far more desires, wants, and I just listened for a RT where of a $300 million for SACOG, even just the $68 million or $89 million request. One of the other things that beyond what you're looking for, in a sense, of a determined source, also you need to address beyond capital operations. And that's something else that needs to be, and how you explain that need and desire. So you need to do the wants, you need to do the needs, and you need to do also what is practical. Because, it's just like in Los Angeles, there's many times 3 ways to get someplace. There's a fast way, there's the best way, and also there's the way that actually works.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for that excellent summation. We have no further comments from directors. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries. The balance of the agenda is comments from directors. Do we have anything to consider for a future agenda? I see nothing. Therefore, we stand adjourned at 2:29.